I actually wrote about a couple, the Hacketts, Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett. I think it might be the only man in the book. I'm not sure.
No, Bella and Sam.
Oh, you wrote about Sam as well. Okay, sorry. I really first was interested in writing. I didn't write my paper until the third semester. That was the time era that they wrote in. But one of our very first lectures by Roseanne, she mentioned Frank Capra as someone who would put his name in huge letters all over a film, even though he wasn't really involved in the writing process. And It's a Wonderful Life is a perfect example of that. And when I thought about it, it's one of my favorite films, and I knew there were other writers attached to it, but I just always thought about Capra's It's a Wonderful Life. Turns out he really had nothing to do with writing it. Kind of stole his 1/3 writing credit. But I love that movie, and so I wanted to research these writers. And they didn't really struggle. They kind of had like successful people problems, but they were an incredibly interesting couple. Both grew up on the East Coast. Both started as actors. Went into playwriting. That's when they met. Started writing together. They had this really amazing love story, but they also would just fight while they wrote. And there were stories when I was researching of them just kind of screaming at each other all day long until they lost their voices. But then once it was on the page, they couldn't remember whose idea was whose. They would always give credit to the other person. And so they wrote The Thin Man. They wrote actually the first 3 of the 6-part series. And several musicals for MGM. It's a Wonderful Life, which they never saw. Read the book. And then their final project, they have so many, but their final project, they wrote the play, The Diary of Anne Frank. And they wrote it several years after World War II, and it ended up winning every award, including the Pulitzer Prize. And then they wrote the film for it as well. So, yeah, I don't know. I love them, and I will talk too much about it. So.